You have probably heard that 15-year-olds cannot consent to sex. It depends a little bit on where you live, but if you live in Norway, that has been the party line and the law recently, right? And still is. But today, we get this document from the government, this officially commissioned report from their experts, these guys, which tells us now that that was all nonsense. 15-year-olds can consent just fine. There is no reason to criminalize sex with 15-year-olds on the basis of age alone. So the normies who bootleg authority and took this as gospel must feel pretty stupid now, huh? Anyway, the march to more criminalization goes on, though. Even though this report and proposal for new sex laws in Norway, if it gets passed, has some good news, not just the lowering of the age of consent, but also the decriminalization of sibling incest and of paying for sex from people over 18. Not minors, but over 18, then that shall be legal again if this is passed. Okay, those are the good parts of this report. But, on the whole, it is actually bad news because it includes an absolute mushrooming of the concept of rape, which I'll make a separate video on. But let's just suffice it to say now that every man is a rapist by this new definition. If you at some point haven't obtained consent, okay, then it might still not be criminal. But if she didn't want it and she indicated that in an ever so slight way, like shaking her head or something, but still went along with it, then you're, well, here's also another twist. You're not a rapist because that word has been abolished, which is so funny. There is no more rape in the Norwegian sex laws after this proposal, if it is passed. I'm absolutely stunned that they would do this because it makes the crime sound a lot less serious when they just call it sex without consent. But also, that's a strategy to get more accusations and convictions, right? But I think it can backfire because you don't have you don't have rape as a crime anymore. And you don't even have sexual assault. It's not changed into anything to do with assault or rape. It's changed into sex without consent as the title of the crime. And once you do that, you can fit a whole lot more sexuality into it. So masculinity itself was already criminalized. And this new proposal, maybe it takes away like 10 sex crimes from the average man's life, and then gives them 100 new ones from this new concept of formerly called rape, no called sex without consent. So I'll make a separate video on that later, but just now to illustrate this age of consent here, they want it lowered to 15, and they admit all the reasons for criminalizing us for having sex with 15-year-olds before. Those were just nonsense. There's nothing to it. And it's more than nonsense. Actually, there was a contradiction in the old law, which they actually admit here. I mean, the logic was just staring them in the face as a blemish, and more than a blemish, because the law deconstructed itself and made the whole thing meaningless when it says that 15 years is also the age of criminal responsibility. So if 15-year-olds can be responsible for sex only when it is criminal, like they can consent to being rapists, 15-year-old boys can be rapists, and be punished for that. But they cannot have consensual sex. That contradiction is funny. It is. I mean, nobody cares about the internal logic of the laws anyway in the general public. But if you do, if you actually look at it, it's gonna hurt your sense of logic, right? So they propose to harmonize this, which will happen when the age of consent is lowered to 15. And another reason they admit is that 15-year-old boys and 16-year-old boys, that is the age of most sex crimes. That is when men are most sex criminal, which isn't a surprise when you know that's also the physiological peak of male sexual performance. That's when men are most sexually aggressive. So it's absolutely absurd to pretend that they cannot consent. I mean, that's like saying Arnold Schwarzenegger, as his most ripped, was too weak to lift a feather, right? The human male at his sexually most aggressive is too weak to consent to sex. Or to, yeah, to consent to sex. That is, that's the party line in a lot of countries still. Where if you have an age of consent older than 16, then you claim that men can be simultaneously at their sexual peak and unable to consent, which is absurd to the extreme. But yeah, I'll have more to say about this later. I was just wanting to get out these very surprising bits. Like the sibling incest getting decriminalized. I didn't see that coming. And I didn't see it coming that rape would be abolished as a concept. And they do this because supposedly they claim that by that the essence in the most serious sex crime isn't actually force and violence or being forced. It is to do it without consent. That's not true. It's not how normal human psychology is. It's just feminist propaganda, feminist extremism, right? And yeah, like I said, I think it can backfire a little bit. But also, they want to remove the minimum sentences. So, yeah, that kind of goes along with this. If you're gonna increase the definition so spectacularly, it would be hard to convict men to a minimum of 3 years in prison. So if a woman just shook her head or something and she wasn't even intoxicated or anything, she just chose to not voice any more dissent and just went along with it, then those minimum sentences are absurdly out of place. So that they get rid of that problem, which isn't to be nice. It is so that you can punish more men. So it is absolutely mushroomed into ever more masculinity itself being criminalized, despite these pieces of good news that I'm focusing on now. The age of consent going down to 15, that is a real victory for men. And also, the right to pay for sex and not be criminalized and punished for that is, of course, a major reversal of radical feminism. So I hope those parts go through. But knowing history of sexual legislation, knowing the march of feminism to take over this civilization, I don't believe it until I see it. It's more likely that only the bad parts of this proposal gets passed as new laws. And they're probably not gonna decrease the age of consent or touch the sex purchase law. It's probably only gonna get worse. But we'll see. I'll leave the link to this entire 368-page report in the description so you can read it yourself if you read Norwegian. So this is an exciting new development, at least. So we'll see how it goes. And see you next time.